Multiple insiders have revealed the Vancouver Canucks are actively looking to move on from UFAs at this year's trade deadline, while Elliotte Friedman also reveals the Canucks are looking to add a forward and specifically a center. We're going to break all this down on this episode, including the implications for not only this year in the postseason, but going into next year. But before we get into that, if you're enjoying this content, make sure to go down and hit that subscribe button. It's completely free. But Josh, we got to hop straight in this today, where we did see Elliotte Friedman talking about the Canucks are a team to keep an eye on with their UFAs, and there's been movement. Rick Dolly went in to say could be Suter. They are far apart in their contract talks. Now we know with Puis Suter, we've seen Elliotte Friedman on 32 Thoughts podcast speak on it too, and have heard them and Puis Suter are not close on extension. I mean, looking at this, Josh, there's so much noise coming out of Vancouver. Do you think Puis Suter has a almost big enough market where the Canucks could even flip him for more pieces and make a second trade, which we will touch on a little later?
I mean, it wouldn't shock me. Puis Suter is one of those guys who, I mean, since he's come into the league, he's been quite consistent, right? You're getting about 15 goals from him, though he's on pace for closer to 20 this year. The cap hit is not egregious. You know, some people could fill him in. And, like, honestly, I think there could be a market for Puis Suter. But the thing is, like, again, if a team is trading for him, the market for just a pure rental, if you're gonna have to give up any kind of significant asset for him, I'm not sold it's gonna be huge. But I think the Canucks are just willing to listen because again, it's one of those cases where Vancouver does have some cap space. They could maybe bring him back or whatever. But if they're not close in terms of an extension for him, if he wants a lot more, the Canucks are willing to do. As you get close to this trade deadline, with the amount of space the Canucks have to bring in maybe someone else to replace a guy like Puis Suter, I don't know. If you're not going to sign him, you might as well give him up instead of just losing him for nothing in the offseason. That's often my thought. But again, you're going to want to get enough back that it helps your playoff push this year. I don't know. Puis Suter is one of those weird cases for me, Mark, where I can see him having some value. I just don't know if the value is going to be enough for the Canucks to be willing to part with him prior to this playoff push, considering he is like up near the top of the team in terms of goal scoring.
And I mean, the biggest thing is he wants a significant raise going into this offseason. Boeser is someone they need to sign. They have a lot of guys that are going to be UFAs. I mean, Derek Forwart's probably going to either be moved on from or kept. Susie's name's in the market. But looking at this, I do think there's a chance they move on from Puis Suter. We've seen Allvin, Jim Rutherford both come out and say, hey, we don't want to lose our own rentals. We've seen it happen with Zadorov, Lindholm. We talk about it constantly. Seeing these guys walk for nothing in the offseason after giving up a haul for both these guys is not something the Canucks want to do. But talking about more trades, Josh, I mean, we also did get from Elliotte Friedman on his 32 Thoughts podcast, which we will link down below. He said they're looking for another forward. I think they like to add another center. Now, Josh, looking at this is a Canucks team that had a hot start going into the Four Nations. We know as soon as they came out, they're 1-4 after that. But looking at the Canucks looking to add, is that kind of surprising from where they're currently in the standings?
I mean, it's hard to say if it's surprising or not. I'm gonna be honest. Like looking at the Canucks situation, it's kind of hard to follow everything that's going on. You hear, oh, JT Miller's gonna stay, and then he's immediately traded. And Elias Pettersson's getting better, and now he's registering less than a shot per game over his last little while. There's looking at their top six, even their top nine. It's hard to say that they maybe couldn't use an upgrade depending on who's available. So I do think it makes sense that Vancouver would want to add specifically a center moving forward. But if Vancouver's going to do that, in my mind, that needs to be a center that comes with term or is at least controllable by the team. Because there is no point in bringing in another UFA like Brock Nelson, for example. I mean, there's a few other guys on this list. Like even Ryan Donato is having a great year, but is Vancouver really the spot for him? Hey, he could bolster their center core, but like, I don't know. To me, Vancouver, if they want a center, it's probably going to be someone with term simply because they're somewhat committed to what they have right now. Like, unless they're willing to blow it all up, which is something that Allvin and look, all the management have said, like that's not something they really want to do if they can help it. A center makes sense. But in terms of the guys available, there's only a certain handful of guys, and I think we're going to get into a couple of them just here in a second.
Because the biggest thing is we've seen them go out, pick up Filip Hronek to come in. As good as Hroek's been and a good play driver, I think he's more better on a third line center, especially if they do move on from Suter in this trade deadline. They could use Hronek as that third line center, but going out to acquire a new second line center, I mean, we've seen them flip assets to go and use those assets to bring in other pieces. We've seen with Elias Pettersson coming from Pittsburgh after they got the first from the Rangers. So I wouldn't be surprised if they moved on from Suter and used it. But Josh, some of these guys, the first name on the list we'd like to talk about is Dylan Cozens. I mean, the biggest thing, listen, with Dylan Cozens, he is having a very down year. We've seen him sign his extension, and I know Canucks fans want to stay away from a guy that's not producing on his new contract, but Dylan Cozens, 24 years old, he's been on this Buffalo team that's not a very good team, let's be honest here. Maybe he unlocks something, but I would not want to move on from Elias Pettersson for Dylan Cozens, especially with the fact that Cozens is not living up to his expectations either. Looking at this, do you think the assets the Canucks maybe have at the moment is even enough to get a guy like this?
I mean, it's hard to say because I don't actually know what Dylan Cozens' trade value is. I don't know what other teams are willing to offer for him. And I'm sure there's been a lot of teams calling over to Buffalo to see if they can pry him away from them. The thing is, like, Dylan Cozens is making $7 million a year, $7.1 million for another 5 years after this. So it's like, like you said, the history that Vancouver has with certain contracts and players not living up to them, it's just something you want to stay away from if you can help it. Can he develop into a 2C? I still believe he can. I mean, again, he's just 2 seasons removed from that 31 goal season, that near point per game year. But, well, I suppose near point per game. He was close enough. But right now, there's more proof that he's a middle 6 level producer than there is a top 6 level producer. A guy who was projected to be a 2-way 1C after that 22-23 season is now 24 years old and is showing signs of regression. So as much as he looks like he could be good in the right fit, and he does fit that guy who could be a 2C for the Canucks going forward, as, a guy who they have under their control. I am not sold on him coming to Vancouver. I would not make this move at all. I think there's some other options, even on shorter term deals that the Canucks could aim for. But hey, that kind of age range with that kind of control does fit. I'm just not sold that Cozens is that final puzzle piece,
Because, I mean, Allvin said they want to go out and pick up centers that's in the early to mid 20s. I mean, he does fit that with 24 years old. We've seen him have a successful season with 31 goals, with 68 points, like you said, in 22. But the biggest thing with Cozens is they're going to ask for a haul, a young center that has the potential on a team control for the next 7 seasons, or 5 seasons, I should say. But looking at this, I would not move any sniffing at pieces. Tom Willander, I wouldn't touch Lecker, Mackey, DPD. I wouldn't want to move these guys out. If you could buy low on them, yes, take the chance. Have them as a 2C. But Josh, kind of looking at the list, there are a lot of guys, like you said, that do not make sense on the list. There's older guys like Brock Nelson. Maybe if the Canucks were looking to add like last season, yes, pick up a guy like this. But someone that is very intriguing, and with the fact that Minnesota wants to add a guy like Brock Boeser, what's your thoughts on Marco Rossi, a guy that's going to be an RFA at the end of the season, still only 23 years old, in the midst of a breakout season? Is this a piece that if the Canucks could acquire in, say, a Brock Boeser trade or for other assets, would you pull this trigger as the Canucks management?
If I'm Canucks management and I'm floated Marco Rossi for anything other than like a drastic overpay, I think that's the exact kind of move you'd want to do. Like, again, he's small, and so there's always that concern of a guy playing center. But again, this guy was a former 120-point player. He was probably the best player in the OHL that year. He's had some health concerns throughout his career, but his comeback story has been amazing. 21 goals, 51 points in 61 games, playing the 1C role, producing like a 1C while he's been there, and he just has such a bright future ahead of him. So for right now, this is the exact kind of guy that I'd be sold on taking a swing on. Like, if it doesn't cost anything ridiculous, the production backs up everything for him. The AHL production into the NHL production every single year is getting better. All the signs were there. The only issue is his height. Is that someone that you want to bring into the Canucks? I think it could still work, especially if you don't have to give up anything drastic for him. Again, his name has been reportedly floated by the Wild. If I'm Minnesota, I don't understand trading him for Brock Boeser type, because Rossi will fit your long-term goals better unless you're concerned that you won't be able to pay everyone that you need to on the team. But Besser's going to ask for something huge. But hey, look, if you can move on from Boeser, you can move on from maybe something else as well, and you can bring in a budding young star in Rossi. I think he fits the bill pretty much exactly for what the Canucks are looking for. Again, minus maybe the size.
Because, I mean, the biggest thing is, like you said, the size, being 5'9", a center, 23 years old. It does fit the mold when it comes to the position, the age, with the production on a breakout season. But the biggest thing is getting him out of Minnesota, like you've said. If Boeser, a 1-for-1, yes, make this trade. I love Brock Boeser. I think he's a huge part for this Canucks team. But looking at the contract talks, the fact that they're not close on an extension, we've seen one rejected early season. Talks are quiet. If they're going to lose Boeser for nothing, make this trade. Even if you had an extension in place, I think this is a trade you almost need to make. This is a team that clearly needs to retool a bit, and I think Rossi would be a major piece. Having PD, Rossi, and Hedl as your three centers. Yes, you're not going to have the most physical centers, but you have Kieser Sherwood. Garland plays a lot bigger than he actually is, but what's your guys' thoughts on this? What's your thoughts on going out and maybe acquiring a guy like Marco Rossi? What's your thoughts on Puis Suter maybe getting moved? Let us know down below. While you're down there, just leave a comment. Make sure to go subscribe. We love reading your comments, but I've been your host, Mark Pye, with my co-host, Josh Goss, and take care.